Good morning, or good mid-morning, I should say. Happy Thursday to all of you. I'm Rob Cox, the global editor of Reuters Breakingviews, the financial commentary arm of Reuters News. Thank you all for tuning in to the fifth virtual event in our series of discussions this month to celebrate The World Emerges, which is our 2020 edition of our annual predictions book. We have one more virtual chat at 2 p.m. European time today with Oliver Bäte, the chief executive of Allianz. In the meantime, I'm very excited about our conversation now with the EU Commissioner for the Economy, Paolo Gentiloni, who until mid-2018 was also the Prime Minister of Italy, and before that had a long political career. The topic of our conversation, which will be led by Lisa Jucca, my colleague in Milan, is how Europe's economies will manage to recover, rebound, and rebuild after the pandemic has passed. Just to set the scene, much of Europe was not in great shape even before COVID-19 came along. We had the Eurozone crisis just 10 years ago. The EU was growing at around 2% just before we got into the pandemic. So, Commissioner, great to see you, and you're in Brussels. We can tell by the flag. I just want to just kick this off and just say, well, welcome, but also, how long, what's your diagnosis for how long it will take for the European Union economy, the Eurozone economy, as it were, to recover? When do you think we'll be out of the pandemic woods, as it were?
Well, first of all, good morning. Thank you very much. Difficult to have. I think one of the more difficult jobs in this moment is forecast. And so I am I express my solidarity with all people working for economic forecasts. We will present our winter forecast around the 10th of February. What is clear to me is, of course, that we have an incredible positive start of the year because of the fact that the rollover of vaccines is beginning. And so we have the famous light at the end of the tunnel. But indeed, we don't know how long the tunnel is. We know that the light is there, but we don't know how long it will take to overcome uncertainty, and uncertainty is still there. So this is the general picture. Going a little bit much in details, you know very well that we had a rather good third quarter in Europe. Surprisingly, even better than our forecast. But then the situation in the fourth quarter and in the beginning of the year is still characterized by restrictions, measures. The index of stringency in European countries is now, at the beginning of this year, even worse than it was in end of October, beginning of November. So this is why we are in a very challenging moment where, of course, recovery is underway, of course, rollover of vaccine is underway, but uncertainty is still dominating. And the second point is that we will, I think, very clearly see that this recovery is uneven. Uneven from the point of view of different European countries, and even from the point of view of different sectors. Of course, manufacture and construction are in a rather good shape, and services, and especially some services, in very bad shape, and uneven for the risk of increasing inequalities. So we are lucky to have some European tools to face this uneven recovery. So I didn't answer on the when, because as you know, this uncertainty makes that we are still in EU under the regime, so to say, of the general escape clause. and we will assess before the summer pause the situation, if this will finish at the end of this year, or if the situation is still so uncertain that there are reasons to prolong this general escape clause. What is clear is that at the end of 2022, it is probable that not all European member states will reach the GDP that they had at the end of 2019, without counting the growth that they would have had without the pandemic. So this is the situation, but there is also a lot of optimism on the possibility of this recovery and rebound thanks to the vaccines.
I mean, you mentioned the rollout of the vaccines. That's just, I'm going to hand this to Lisa in 1 second, but just to follow up, I mean, that there is this view out there that some people have espoused, which is that we'll have, as a result of a steep decline in the death rates, as a result of the vaccines going to those people who are, of course, the older folks who are more likely to die, we get this sort of euphoric bounce. We have this much greater than anticipated. And so, well, I mean, we're anticipating it now. I mean, do you think, I mean, you're being very cautious, optimistic, cautious, but do you think we actually might be in a position where three months from now, say, when we start to see that steep decline in death rates, even though infection rates might be high, because younger people are still getting it, that we actually can see the stringency index, you know, stringent measures drop, that the economy starts roaring, people, that pent-up demand starts coming back, and by the summer, we're having a fantastic European economy?
Well, of course, I hope, but honestly, I don't think that at the time we can reasonably say something like this. The reality is that we indeed are not sure about the timing. We are sure of the fact that in any case we will live with the pandemic for a longer period, also because of the fact that we need, of course, to face a global pandemic, and the rollover of vaccines is has to be extended to all over the world, but this is not easy. The COVAX initiative will land in the countries. It is targeted to beginning in the second quarter at the best, and we are trying to to encourage member states to help also other part of the world, beginning from our neighborhood. But of course, this is not easy for many reasons that you can very easily imagine. So the pandemic will be with us for a long period because it is a global pandemic. Of course, the success of the vaccines campaign in European countries could come before this and create the perspective. I would say also the psychologically the perspective of a quick and strong rebound. It is possible, but we are not yet there.
Okay. So thank you, Commissioner Gentiloni, for this initial remarks, and thank you indeed for being here today at the Reuters Breakingviews prediction event. What I wanted to do is spend maybe a few minutes to try and look at the tools. I mean, you were referring to just a few seconds ago, the tools that the European Union has put in place to try and repair and rebuild the economy after it was damaged by the pandemic. And I'm obviously specifically referring to the 750 billion euros that the EU has collectively pledged in its next generation EU plan to try and sort of jumpstart the economy. So we'd really like to understand, how this works, but also more importantly, whether this wall of money that is coming can really make Europe more competitive, and not only sort of bringing us back to the level we were before the pandemic, but push us forward in economic terms. So how can this be possible?
Well, this is exactly the scope of this facility, of this next generation EU, because we know that Europe, the European Union, is not a federal state. So we know that we had already this year an amazing reaction from member states. More than 4% of GDP in extraordinary expenditures, and something around 25% of GDP on guarantees, tax deferrals, etc. But on top of that, we have common tools. And this is, as you know very well, unprecedented. For years, we heard that the European Union, and especially the euro area, had a monetary policy, but didn't have a fiscal policy with a firepower, so to say. And rightly so. This has been for a long time a problem. But this reaction to the pandemic, for the first time, gives to our fiscal policy also very important tools. How will they work? Well, formally, I think you know how the process goes. We have now the approval of the final approval of the regulation that will come in the first half of February from the plenary of the European Parliament. And from this moment, the formal submitting of national recovery and resilience plan from European member states can begin. Then we have, in theory, a timetable that we established in our regulation. The Commission has a certain amount of time to validate this proposal and propose to the Council to approve these plans. At the end of this process, proposal of the Commission, approval of the Council, the country receives 13% of the overall plan that is presented. I am mentioning this because, of course, this means that at a certain moment in late spring, the Commission will go in financial markets to raise this money to begin to raise this money for next generation EU, with the first target of disbursing this pre-financing of 13% to each and every member states that has the approval of the plan. I am personally very optimistic on this issuing of the European debt. We have an experience, as you know, in November and December with this SURE mechanism, where the social bonds were oversubscribed, I think, 14 times. And the fact that part of this subscription in late spring will be on green bonds also add, I think, to the interest of financial markets towards this initiative. So this is the timetable, if you want. In this timetable, it is crucial, I think, to have two clear things. One is that ownership is in the member states and governments to present their plans, to propose their initiatives. But at the same time, the Commission is not transferring money. We are not a financial intermediary. So we will assess these plans, their coherence with the common goals, the fact that we have sufficient amount of reforms and not only expenditures and investment, and so on and so on. The process is already going on, and I think that February and March will be the key months for the assessment from the Commission of National Recovery and Resilience Plan.
Okay. I mean, obviously, I mean, there is a process ongoing, as you told us, but again, you know, I want to stress how important, I mean, this facility is. I mean, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described it as Europe's man on the moon moment, because it's really a collective effort when where we have, let's say, richer states or stronger states that are also, you know, sharing more with those who are in difficulties or have been hit more heavily by the pandemic. So it's quite a sharing of the burden type of approach. But the question is, however, there is a feeling maybe that, I mean, you alluded to that there may be a tendency by certain governments to use the funds, not so much to push Europe ahead, but maybe to fund pet projects, to just continue with certain bad habits. So I know that the Commission will be a sort of gatekeeper, if you want, or at least initial referee. How satisfied are you up until now with what you're seeing in the draft plans that are being put to you? Are we going in the right direction?
Well, I would say broadly, yes. But I think we have to consider also two problems. One is that only 16, 17 member states until now presented real draft of these national plans. Other 10 member states either presented only some components, or they are still in a preliminary discussion without presenting anything. So the first problem is that we are working at different speed in this preparation, and we have different problems with some countries behind the rest of the group. And second problem is that, of course, the Commission is the guardian of the fact that this unprecedented opportunity will not be lost. It is completely unthinkable that such an important decision that will remain in our history, but that will also remain in our future, because we will repay this common debt until 2056. So it's something for the next generations, of course. It is unthinkable that this is not in compliance with the common goals and common rules that we decided together. And so the Commission is strongly working on this. We acknowledge that it is not easy for member states, because they had until a few weeks ago their national budgets for 2021 to work in. They are facing the pandemic. There is an overburden on not only finance ministers, but on governments in general. And there are a lot of rules to respect, as always, when you use the common European money. But having acknowledged this, we ask member states, of course, to be owner of the proposal, but to address our country recommendations and to address our priorities, etc., etc., etc. When we say we want to build back better, of course, this means that we need from this 750 billion an added value. And where do we find an added value? We find an added value on our two main priorities, the green transition and the competitivity on the digital field. And we find an added value if we use this unprecedented opportunity to overcome bottlenecks and difficulties in member states. These two things should work together. And the orientation and the awareness in member states is there, but we have still a lot of work ahead to transform this orientation in practical targets, projects, milestones, commitments. A lot of work to do.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, this plan is about, it's a combination of grants, which are basically given with no expectation of repayment, and loans. The question, and obviously it's for the next generation, but the question is, what happens if a country doesn't pay, its money back? Is the buck going to stop with the rest of the group? Isn't this creating a moral hazard in a way?
No, I wouldn't mention the moral hazard. I think the decision, of course, was a very unique and courageous decision. It was taken, this decision, I think, for reason of solidarity. We frequently underestimate such a essential reaction. It was solidarity, the first mover. And second, of course, it was the concern of the consequences for the single market and for the single currency of a uneven, too high divergence among European countries. So this decision taken, there is no moral hazard, because the repayment of this common debt should be and will happen with common resources. This is our decision, our commitment. This will happen in 30 years from 26 to 56. It is not an enormous burden. It's around, I think, 13 to 15 billion per year of repayment. And this will be done through our own resources. This is the commitment the Commission taken to make proposals to increase our own resources for this repayment. So there is no moral hazard. Of course, countries know very well that the loans component of this facility contribute to the debts of the single member state. And this is in the government's hands to decide how much. I had personally a very good experience signing 17, I think, agreements on the sure loans, because this shows that even in a very low interest rate situation as the one we are in, European loans could be very interesting for the majority of member states of the European Union, which is a little bit surprising for a certain point of view, given the very low level of interest rates. But so I hope that also for next generation EU, we will have use of loans. But of course, I understand the caution that member states are also applying, because loans are augmenting the national debts.
Yes, no, absolutely. Just wanted to sort of move on to another tool that you mentioned that the EU is using. I mean, you mentioned this general escape clause. I mean, basically what that means is a de facto suspension of the fiscal EU rules. I mean, the Stability and Growth Pact rules that have governed the Eurozone budgets up until now. And obviously, we also have a suspension of state aid rules last year, but also this year. So it's unclear when this should be reinstated. I mean, what would be, in your view, the conditions that the EC needs to see for restarting or restoring this fiscal and state aid rules?
Well, the state aid rules, we have a temporary framework that was adopted in middle of March, and we are updating this temporary framework in these weeks, and it will be a process. On the fiscal rules, we will also probably have a process of discussions of the rules, but what we are in now is a regime with this so-called general escape clause. So the issue here is how long will this general escape clause last? What is clear now is that, and we also formally communicated to member states this in September, that this general escape clause will remain in place until the end of this year. This doesn't mean automatically that it will not be in place from January the 1st, 2022. It means that it will be in place until the end of this year. For 2022, I think we will discuss this in spring, late spring, because we have to give certainty to member states for their budget of 2022. And we don't have a very articulated regulation on the subject. The only reference that we have to this general escape clause that we used for the first time in European experience is that the general escape clause, I quote, is activated in case of severe economic downturn affecting the whole economy of the Union. So the consequence is that we untrigger this general escape clause when this severe economic downturn affecting the whole European Union is over. It will be interesting to discuss in next April and May if this is already clearly the case or not. But I think I'm quite confident that in a few months from now, we will have more clarity in the perspective and we will take a decision.
Okay. I mean, I see that you don't want to sort of give us, let's say, a precise time framework, but I mean, these fiscal rules in particular, I mean, they never seem to work very well. I mean, many countries ignore or broke the various limits that were imposed to them. And we went on with those for years. So, you know, there are people saying that maybe we shouldn't reintroduce the Stability and Growth Pact at all. I mean, we have the ECB helping, cushioning the markets, you know, with its immense asset buying program. So, I mean, is there really a compelling reason for reintroducing the same old rules that, you know, many countries ignored?
Well, there is a compelling reason to reintroduce our common rules, for sure. because what is the progress if we say that, and we are very happy about this and also proud, that maybe for the first time the Union has a fiscal policy with firepower, but if at the same time we decide not to have common rules, this will be not a progress at all. So yes, of course, we need common rules. The point is that there was already a review of these of the procedures of these common rules, not of the treaties, but of the regulation, of the legislation of what we call the six-pack and two-pack regulation. This review began, as you know, 1 year ago, and then it was put on hold because, of course, of the pandemic and of the general escape clause decision. This review will be relaunched, of course, this year. And is there the basis for this review to produce changes in our framework of rules? Yes, my answer is yes. And I think every reasonable person knows not only that we had, even before the pandemic, very good reasons to introduce changes in these rules, and we were doing this in the discussion, but after the pandemic, these reasons are even stronger. Why are they stronger? For two main reasons. First, we have to avoid, especially after the pandemic, a drop in public investments. We saw a drop in public investments going to zero in net public investments after the previous crisis. And we should not repeat this. If we are serious in our commitment, for example, on the European Green Deal, the climate change, the transformation, how can we do this if we are not strengthening the public investment? And second reason is that in an environment that remains an environment of very low interest rates, we will come to this discussion with a very high level of debt.
Yes.
Our debt was 84% of GDP in 2019 and will be above 100% this year. So of course, we need to discuss how to make these rules more simple, more pro-growth, and how can we really assure the gradual reduction of public debt, which remains one of the goals of our common rules.
Okay, so maybe less austerity, but still within a common framework. I'd like to sort of thank you for these initial remarks. Yes, okay, so that was my summary. But anyway, I'd like to give back the floor to Rob after these initial remarks.
Oh, well, thank you. So I want to turn across the pond, Commissioner. So yesterday we had the inauguration of President Biden. I think you were on Twitter hugging yourself in November when he was elected.
This was the lockdown.
Yeah. I mean, what's your sense? I mean, how do you see the EU and the Europe and the United States, sort of on an economic front? I mean, we had quite a bit of tension. There were tariff tensions, things like that. There are a few things that could be done between the US and Europe. What's your sense? How optimistic are you? Have you spoken to your counterparts there, or I guess it would be Janet Yellen or Brian Deese in the White House? But, just love to get your sense about what can be done and as a result of this new administration taking office.
Well, I think there is a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of people saying, yes, but take care, avoid to be too much optimistic, etc., etc. But the enthusiasm comes from the situation we were in, not from a ingenuous optimism on the perspective of the future. Now, we all know that difficulties do not disappear, but we know that we had a difficult period in the last years where EU and United States appeared more, not in our view, but in the US administration view, of course, more as competitors than as an alliance. And we don't ignore the fact that there is also economic competition among us, but without a strong transatlantic alliance, we are not addressing to the global problems. So optimism, we had an interesting conversation in the last Eurogroup with Professor Larry Summers, and he used the words of multilateral warmth emerging.
Multilateral warmth, that's a good one.
And I like these words. We need this. We need this in the G20 if we want to tackle the problem of the global distribution of vaccines, for example. If we want to strengthen the IMF, if we want to address the problems of default in poorer countries. We made some progress also in the recent years, but if you look to climate change, for example, the situation changed completely. It was difficult. I personally also can testify because I was hosting the first meeting of the G7 with President Trump. It was difficult to mention the climate change issues in our communiques in G7 and G20 in these years. And
the Trump administration was fighting to keep out any sort of suggestion that...
I respect this position, but of course, now that this position has changed, we are very, I think, quite optimistic. And as far as the economic issues are concerned, I have seen very positive statements coming from Secretary Yellen that I didn't speak with until now, but I will for sure soon. But I have seen very interesting things, not only in general. She said it is important to act big, commenting the new stimulus package that President Biden anticipated, but also on rather controversial issues like the one of global taxation that we will address in the G20 for the corporate taxation and the digital taxation, and in our international relation for the carbon border mechanisms. So I think we are starting really a new period, again with a transatlantic understanding, which is absolutely crucial if we want to give to the global problems the right answers.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned taxation. It was true that Secretary Yellen brought that up in her testimony yesterday. I mean, she suggested there's a sort of, there's a willingness to work something out, whether it's a harmonization of taxes, maybe it's that OECD initiative, although I feel like we keep going over and over and hearing about that every year. There's some hope, but I don't know. And then the digital, certainly there was a forestalling of any digital taxation, which I think was actually under the Trump administration. What can be, is this like, could you put this at the top of the agenda between the US and Europe? I mean, what would you, if you had like a 2 agenda items at the top, what would they be?
Well, I think in the agenda, we have an enormous amount of things. Maybe the very first issue is how to cooperate, having again America on the table of not only of the Paris Agreement, but after the Georgia suppletive elections, we have America on board also with possible important decisions, internal decisions going in this direction, because it is not only to re-enter in the Paris Agreement, it is also the fact that the main world economy has now the possibility to adopt changes. And I have to say that when we decided in the European Union, this European Green Deal, as you remember, it was the first identity action of this new commission. It was a very bold decision. When we confirmed and even accelerated this decision during the pandemic, it could appear a rather exaggeratedly bold decision, but the reality then showed us in the last months that several countries, from Japan to South Korea to South Africa, and now, of course, more importantly, US, are on board on this. And so I think the European Union has the advantage of the early movers in this issue. Also for the carbon border adjustment mechanism, our proposals that we are working to present on next 5 months could be a sort of standard at a global level, because it will be the first proposal, but we know that many of the global players have this in mind as very important. This is perhaps the priority number 1. If I should mention 2 other priorities, I would mention first the global effort for recovery, because we have to deploy all the potentiality of our multilateral initiative, both with the British presidency of the G7 and the Italian presidency of the G20. And we see we can't say that the debt suspension, the debt service suspension initiative is enough to face the crisis that we are seeing in lower income countries around the world. So global initiative, climate change, and of course, global taxation, where I think it is very clear that that global solutions are useful for everybody, even for the big corporate. I am sure that the proliferation of national regimes is not something particularly well seen by big corporations. Yeah. Maybe they have to pay something more for the digital or for the minimal corporate taxation, but it will be a big advantage to have a common regime. And I have to say we had some success in the G20, for example, on the BEPS issue in the last years, exchange of information and the fight to two different taxation regimes, so to say it in a diplomatic way. But we have to go on, and I hope that this will be the case with this new U.S. administration.
And where does I'd be interested in to get your perspective on the U.S.-China relationship and where Europe fits into that. It does look like it's going to be a continuation of a relatively aggressive stance towards China, continuing with the Biden administration. The EU just signed a pretty historic investment agreement with China, sort of at the end of the year. I think you've been working on it for quite some time. Just curious why the EU thought to go ahead and sign that deal ahead of the inauguration, when a lot of the discussion prior to this, and one of the criticisms of the Trump administration's approach was that it wasn't working with allies, particularly the European Union, and having a sort of more leveraged approach to China. How should we read the European Union's decision to move ahead with this agreement, which also is not, I think there's some questions about what it actually contains.
I think a lot of work has been done in 7 years to reach this agreement. And the conditions to finalize this agreement came in these recent weeks and months. And if the conditions are coming, I think it is not reasonable to not to take them. Why is this agreement important? Of course, it is important to establish a more advanced, so to say, level playing field for European business and companies in working with China. I think that EU companies will benefit from this agreement, but of course, and there is also something interesting in this agreement on Chinese commitments on sustainable development, interesting things. Then, of course, two points. First, we will be very active in looking closely to the implementation of this agreement, especially in the 2 years period that we have of, we will have a sort of rendezvous close after 2 years, because this agreement has to be implemented, and the Commission should be the guarantee that this will indeed happen. This is the first. The second point is that this has not is nothing in contradiction with our common transatlantic cooperation towards also China, because this agreement, by the way, is not so different from previous agreement that US reached with China, the agreement that was called, as you know, the Phase 1 agreement is not so different. But then, of course, we are together, countries of the free and liberal economies. We will cooperate, and we have to face this strategic challenge that is the Chinese presence. But Europe cannot face this challenge only as a supporter of the US position. Of course, we are allied of United States. We are not neutral in this global story, but we have our own interests and own policies, and we have to work together with our allies and transatlantic allies on the subject. So this is what we did, and I think that I'm quite optimistic. I agree with you, we will not have substantial changes in the attitude towards China from the new administration. This is my guess, my impression, because the changes went on in America in the last years, not only for the initiative of President Trump, but for a general consensus. And I don't think that this will change very much. It could change on the, the way of.
Right. Yeah, they might use a velvet touch versus the sledgehammer.
Yes, a different style, but the substance is, I think, will not change.
Right. I want to turn it. Thank you for that answer, Lisa. Let's take it closer to home.
Yes, obviously, Commissioner, you have been Prime Minister of Italy, and Italy is at the center of the the Next Generation EU plan that we discussed, because it's the biggest beneficiary with 209 billion. And also, it is still the Eurozone's problem child with, very high debt, which will go even higher, 169% probably relative to GDP. So, we've seen a change of the political situation. The government of Prime Minister Conte is much weakened in Parliament, as you will have seen. So how concerned are you? How concerned is the European Commission that this new, much weaker government, won't be able to push through the recovery plan and get the funds that it needs, or even spend them, given that Italy has a really poor track record in utilizing EU funds?
Well, I will not comment on the internal. It's not easy for me, but making an effort. I will not comment on the political situation in my country. The Commission works with governments, and we work, and we will continue to work with the Italian government with the goal to have a success in the recovery and the resilient plan in Italy, exactly for the reason that a success of the plan in Italy is very important for the general success of the story, because it is not in relative terms. There are other countries that are more beneficiary in relative terms, but given the dimension of the Italian economy, it's a substantial part of the plan is there. So the work has to continue, will continue, is continuing, and I think that the Italian authorities are aware of the need to strengthen the proposals that were presented until now. We need especially, I think, two things. One is to have clear messages on reforms connected to the country recommendations that the Commission issued in 2019. And the second is we need, so to say, details on the timing, on the projects, on the targets. It is it is a big effort, I know, for governments, because it is a lot of effort to follow our guidances, our templates, etc., etc. But it is such an important challenge that guaranteeing success is worth this kind of work.
Should the government, should the government, I mean, given the situation, I mean, maybe set up a task force or, something that somehow allows them to focus and really speed up in this final crucial moment for the drafting of the plans?
Well, this is up to them to decide, not for the Commission. The Commission is only interested in having clarity on the timetables, the targets that you want to reach. What is needed from member states, I think they have clarity, but perhaps not completely in the public opinion among stakeholders. What needs to be clarified is that this is a peculiar form of, so to say, European money, because it comes after the first disbursement, the one we mentioned before, the 13% of financing. It will come probably twice a year with disbursement conditioned to the fact that some targets in a certain agreed timing are reached. If these targets are not reached, there is the risk that this disbursement will not come. And this is what we are discussing in these weeks with the 17 member states that are presenting, that have already presented their, so not only Italy, but also other 15 member states that presented their draft proposal. I repeat, it's a matter of attention and quality of the proposed reforms. Of course, it's a matter of coherence with the common goals, the green transition, the digital, but this, I think, is already very clear with member states.
Okay, I mean, I'm sorry to sort of jump in because obviously we have very, very few minutes, but I wanted, before we close this event, I wanted to ask one final question, which I know is quite important for you, if you could answer briefly. I mean, I know you've given some thoughts to that, but how can the EU strengthen the role of the euro as a reserve currency? I mean, we haven't touched on this important topic, but if you could give us a very brief answer before we conclude, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, I think, well, the reality is, as you know, that the euro is the second global currency. We have around 38% of global payments in euro and something like 20% of foreign exchange reserves in euro. It has not changed so much since the beginning of the euro. What has changed in the global environment is that the dollar, that was around 70% of the reserves, is now around 60%. And this because of the increase, of course, of China and other in Asia. So there is plenty of reason why the euro could strengthen its international role. I think we will have something contributing to this. First, the fact that we will be very big issuer of common debt. We will issue something like 1 trillion in financial market from now to 26. So we will have an enormous amount of euro-denominated financing, which is in de facto something strengthening the role of the currency. The green component of this issuing is absolutely important. I was very interested on the fact that the ECB stated that around half of all global green bond issuance are denominated in euro, half, and 30% of this amount is coming from issuers outside the euro area. So we are the main player in global green bond issuers. And this, I think, is a second component that could strengthen the role of the euro. And then we have the experience of recent agreements on energy that showed that if we play the card of the euro in our agreements, the increase is impressive. In the recent years, the trade agreement for energy denominated in euro and not in dollars doubled in the last few years. And this shows that with the outreach that we will have in financial markets with our trading partners, we can strengthen this. We are in a multi-currency world. And in a multi-currency world, a stronger euro is very important, not only for Europe.
Well, great. On that note, I want to thank you, Commissioner Gentiloni, and wish you a good and productive 2021 and a healthy one. And thanks to all of all the folks out there who tuned in. Again, we'll have one more of these events this afternoon, well, in an hour, with the CEO of Allianz. And I wish you all a pleasant 2021. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Grazie.